opportunity to thank His Excellency for joining us this morning, and to thank Alexis and everybody on his staff for setting this up. It's been a madly busy time for everybody. But welcome, Mr. Ambassador. So lovely to be able to see you.
Hi, thank you for having me, and Moedim L'Simcha.
Chagim Uzmanim Lasasson. How have you been spending the last couple of days?
Well, like most of you, we had a very small Regev Seder, which was a bit of a disappointment because ever since arriving here, we've had a huge Seder for the embassy staff. As I've explained, I think in our numerous conversations, Rabbi, for Israeli diplomats, sometimes the holidays can be a bit depressing because they're used to being with extended families, and suddenly when they're here posted in London, they're just here with their small families, just, you know, the partners and their children. And so the holidays can be a touch, as I said before, depressing. And so we had this history at the embassy where we would invite everyone to the residence, and we'd have this like a kibbutz type Seder. And I couldn't do it this year. It was very disappointing.
So how have you been spending your time?
So I've been spending my time reading and going for walks. As you know, in Britain, the Prime Minister, we wish him health, and I'm very glad that he got out of hospital, yes. Yeah. That is allowed. Otherwise, I've been staying at home.
Right. So just a little bit of biographical information for people who aren't familiar with Mark Regev. He was born in Australia, has a degree in political science. He was very active in Habonim, made Aliyah, studied international relations in the IDF Staff College, served in Hong Kong, Beijing, and Washington embassies. And most people will have come into contact with him when he was the spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2004 through to 2007, and then substantially with his close work with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Is he correctly Prime Minister Netanyahu at the moment?
Sorry, again?
Is he correctly Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Yes, of course, he's Prime Minister. He is Prime
Minister at the moment. We'll get to that in a moment. But working very closely with him, was a spokesperson and on the screens and a very popular and compelling advocate for Israel. And so we were absolutely delighted that he was the appointee to replace Danny Taub as ambassador in 2015. We had an excellent relationship, of course, with Danny, and we're wondering, would anybody be able to be as great an ambassador? I'm not prepared to pick favorites, but Mr. Ambassador, we have enjoyed your time with us. Mark is married to Vered and has 3 children. Where are your kids at the moment?
So my youngest son is with us here. He's finishing high school here in London, and when we return to Israel, he'll return with us. I've got 2 older children. One is a student at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. She's studying law, and she is continuing. There's obviously the Passover, the Pesach break at the moment, but they've continued their studies online, distance learning through computers. And so though there was some initial a lag period to get that together, they continue to study. And my son works for Intel. He lives in Even Yehuda, near Netanya. And Intel has been very good. He's been working from home now, I think, for about a month. Both my children are safe and healthy, which is good.
Baruch Hashem. And so what excited you about the appointment to the Court of St. James?
It was for me like the fulfillment of a dream. I'd been the government spokesperson in Jerusalem for close to a decade. And it was time to do something else. It was time to try to let someone else move into that position. And when London opened up, I was very glad that it worked out that I could get the job. Ultimately, I always thought that one of my skills was the ability to present Israel's case. After all, that's what I did on television for all those years as government spokesperson. So in coming here to London, I thought that would allow me to continue. Obviously, Britain is not just an important country, but it's a global media center. And I thought if I could continue doing part of that job of presenting Israel's case from the UK's capital, that would be a good thing too.
And how did you decide that this is actually what you wanted to be doing in life?
I have this story about that I became a diplomat by accident. I was doing a doctorate at Tel Aviv University in international relations, and I'd finished all my coursework, and I actually had to sit down and write the research, yes, and put it all together. And I, like a lot of academics at the beginning, I was very frustrated. I didn't have the motivation, and I was going through a period where, is this really what I want to do? And there was an ad in the newspaper saying, take the entrance exam for the Foreign Service. And my wife said, why don't you do that? What have you got to lose? And it's very competitive to get into the Israeli Foreign Service. Many people apply, and they accept only a small amount. And for some reason, they accepted me. Had I been a more successful academic, I would never have joined my country's Foreign Service, and I would never have become ambassador to London. It's all because I'm a failed academic.
Right. And so what inspired you? Who's inspired you in your life generally? And who have you met as ambassador that's particularly inspired you?
I've met many people along the way who I've had great respect for. The different prime ministers I've worked with, including, of course, the current person who holds the post. I think, I know this isn't objective, but after being close up to the center of power in Israel, I believe that there's no more difficult job on the planet than being the prime minister of the state of Israel. Because of course, every prime minister or president, everyone who leaves the country has great responsibility on their shoulders. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. It's not easy to be the prime minister of the United Kingdom. It's not easy to be the president of the United States. But I believe that in Britain and America, there are levels of protection that the Israeli prime minister doesn't have. I mean, ultimately, Israel is a smaller country, and it's a country where everyone knows someone, and the prime minister doesn't have those layers of protection that the inhabitant of the White House, the incumbent president, has. Also, let's be clear, Israel's in a unique situation where it still has people around it who say openly that Israel should be destroyed. So the Prime Minister of Israel has to deal with national security challenges that I don't think any other global leader has to deal with. And on top of that, he's got to make sure that the teachers are paid and the health workers are looked after and that the garbage is collected. And so the Prime Minister of Israel, I think, does have a very difficult job. And the people who reach the top in Israel tend to be very, very special people.
Right. Do you think that's something that is true in all countries? I know when I know when there was a lot of discussion about George W. Bush, people were commenting about his bumbling personality at the beginning. And Tony Blair at the time said it's impossible to become leader of the United States of America without having some great talents. And we still wonder about that. But is it true that people become political leaders only with some measure of acumen?
I would say the following: in Israel, to reach the very top, you have to be a very special personality, and Israel has been led by some very special people. David Ben-Gurion, our first prime minister, was indeed a historic figure. Golda Meir, a historic figure. Menachem Begin, a historic figure. Ariel Sharon, a historic figure. Yitzhak Rabin, a historic figure. Netanyahu, who is now, as you know, Israel's longest-serving prime minister ever. I think last year he passed Ben-Gurion in longevity in the position. No doubt, a historic figure.
And outside of Israeli politics, who's inspired you in life?
Well, I suppose you said in the introduction, being a member of Habonim, being a member of a Zionist youth movement, the idea that, and here I'm not saying one particular movement is better than another, but I think the idea that one should give of oneself to a larger goal and then just personal ambition. I think that's been important for me. I think the family that I grew up with, being the son of a Holocaust survivor, no doubt also affected the way I turned out. My mother was the one who inspired me to get into into the political world. I remember my father as well, we'd sit around the table and they'd talk about politics and international relations. I remember when I was a young man, during the Yom Kippur War, my father said he wanted to go volunteer to drive a truck for Israel. Luckily for the family, Israel didn't need truck drivers from Australia, yes? But there's no doubt that we're all products from our upbringing and of where we came from.
Wonderful. And so what's going on in Israel at the moment?
So it's Chol HaMoed Pesach. A lot of people are not at work, they're at home, and that's combined, of course, with the lockdown because of coronavirus.
Right. How's the coronavirus affecting Israel?
So obviously the whole country is in a difficult situation. We've now passed 100 deaths, which is very sad. Every death is a tragedy. But internationally, if you compare Israel with other countries, we've done surprisingly well. Our death rate is very, very low. I'm not just talking in absolute terms, because we're obviously a smaller country. We're only 9 million people. But in per capita terms, I mean, if I can share an interesting statistic with you, and I can't explain why this, maybe you can have answers for me, but less Israelis have died, and there are 9 million Israelis from coronavirus than have UK Jews. And how many UK Jews are there? There's less than 300,000, I'm told. So the Israeli government appears to be doing something very right in the way we're dealing with coronavirus. We were one of the countries that I think, you know, Rabbi, better than me, that in Judaism there's Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, yes? How would we say that in good English? One side is more, I don't know, liberal, and one side is more severe. Is that the correct terminology, Rabbi?
Possibly so. One has a greater breadth of vision for the people, and one is more focused on the halacha and preserving the relationship with God. I mean, but both of them want the same.
So I think there's no doubt that the Israeli government was more severe. I remember at the very beginning of the crisis, Israel stopped flights from South Korea, and our ambassador in South Korea was called in and saying, "You're a friendly country, why are you closing your flights?" And my ambassador there had to explain that, well, this is part of keeping our people safe. And in the end, a lot of people closed their flights to other countries. In other words, Israel, in many ways, and I think we have to give credit to the Prime Minister, he was out there in front understanding that we had to take steps, and Israel was one of the first countries to take steps that many other countries followed that after us.
So I think it's very telling when my wife Mandy had her graduation in New Zealand years and years ago, as part of the graduation speech, for no particularly clear reason, I think it was the chancellor of the university, whoever was officiating, said how remarkable, you know, we're countries of much the same size. We need to be aspiring to Israel's success in education and as many people getting degrees of the same qualities as Israel. And just a few weeks ago, when lockdowns began in New Zealand, exactly the same thing happened. The Prime Minister said, you know, we've got a country we need to preserve, and we're going to follow the lead of Israel in managing its lockdown. So kudos to Medinat Yisrael on the way it handles those things. What lessons do you think have been learned from, you know, that are being learned from the way Israel's handled it? And what lessons do you think, you know, we could learn from what you've seen here?
So I don't claim that Israel has a monopoly on understanding or truth. I think we're all in many ways learning as we go ahead, because this virus took us all by surprise, and no government around the world was ready to deal with its impact. We are in Israel. There are issues like you have in the UK. Are enough people being tested? Do we have enough ventilator machines to help people breathe, and so forth? But there's something about Israel that we seem to be, I think, dealing with the crisis. Obviously, there are issues and there are challenges, but dealing with the crisis effectively. And maybe one of the reasons we've kept our death rate relatively low is, first of all, we fight for every life. Yes, it's part of our Jewish tradition. Yes, every life is sacred, and if you save one life, it's as if you saved all humanity. And I remember the doctors don't give up on people, and it's something very impressive, and the solidarity. And our health workers, I mean, I'm sure you could say much of the same for health workers in this country as well, but there's no doubt in Israel, we've done so far, and I hope it keeps that way, we've done a good job at keeping our fatalities very low by any international standard.
Right. How is the virus affecting what's going on with the Israel's different minorities? I mean, clearly there's a large Jewish community that's got its particular concerns, but there are many different religious and cultural groups within Israel. How have they been affected?
So there was big issues, as you know, Rabbi, with the ultra-Orthodox community, who there was some criticism in the rest of Israeli society that they weren't doing their part. In other words, the government was giving guidelines that they weren't adopting those guidelines. And here I think we have to say two things. Number one, you can't put the whole ultra-Orthodox community in a single spot. Ultra-Orthodox community tends to has its own groups, and to put them all is always easy to point the light at the most extreme or the most fanatical elements in that community and paint them all in the same brush. Yes, it's not true. And the second thing that has to be said is if you do a public relations campaign as a government, yes, and you tell people that they must do A, B, and C to protect themselves in coronavirus, and you're, let's say, doing that on Israeli television. So you're not reaching those Israelis, in this case, the ultra-Orthodox community, who are not watching the nightly news because they don't have television, and they're not listening to the normal radio either, and they're not reading normal newspapers. And so it's very important that we speak to the different communities in Israel, in this case, particularly the ultra-Orthodox community, through the medium that they are listening to, and to speak to them as a community effectively. And I'm sure at the end of this crisis, and hopefully that's not too far away, we will have learned lessons on how best to speak to different communities within Israel, because ultimately not everyone is watching the nightly news at 8 o'clock. Yes, most people are, but not everyone is. And how do you speak to those minority community members who get their information through other means?
And how have the Christian and the Muslim communities with their own festivals been impacted, and how has the state worked with them on making sure that they've been involved, connected, informed?
So that as a whole, that's not been a problem. I mean, look, in Israel, when it was people were asked not to come to synagogue on Pesach, right? I mean, you know what an important decision that was here. It's never been done in Britain. I did an interview for Israeli radio a few days ago. And I said, synagogues were functioning here during the Blitz, yes? When the Luftwaffe was bombing London and these synagogues were functioning, were closed now because of coronavirus. And the truth is in Israel, synagogues that have never, ever been closed are now closed because of the virus. And it's the same with the churches and the mosques, and people understand. And once again, Rabbi, you know this better than me, pikuach nefesh, to save a life is the most important thing, and everything has to be subservient to keeping people healthy and safe.
Right. How has the virus affected your job as an ambassador? You know, diplomacy is about meeting people and receptions and a lot of face-to-face activity. I know, you know, diplomacy was a word I first learned as a kid with Henry Kissinger going on shuttle diplomacy. I mean, what is Zoom diplomacy like?
So the best example is my relationship with you and Kinlos Synagogue, because ultimately I was supposed to be, was it a Wednesday night 3 weeks ago, as I was supposed to come and give a talk, and we were supposed to do this in front of the membership face-to-face with your congregation. And what we're doing now is probably the best answer to the question. If you can't meet people in the flesh, yes, you can meet them online, you can meet them digitally. And we spoke about doing this last week because we had to cancel that event, and I felt bad about it. So obviously, one has to, it's better to meet people in the flesh. You get better feedback, you can, yes. But we are doing things like this, and it's not just the way we're doing it now in this conversation. I can tell you that last week there was a conversation on very sensitive issues between the UK and Israeli governments through a similar platform. Leaders are still speaking. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke last week with acting Prime Minister Dominic Raab because, as you know, your Prime Minister here was sick about a bunch of issues that need to be discussed. So the work goes on. To be frank, Rabbi, I go to less charity dinners in the evening now because of coronavirus. And here I have to say I'm worried about a lot of the charities because it's difficult for them, yes, how they support good causes and what's going to happen now because of coronavirus. That whole charity sector could be in a very difficult place. I hope it doesn't last for long.
Has the international crisis created new links and forged new alliances and places of warmth, or has it brought other tensions to the surface that have actually exacerbated themselves?
Difficult question, Rabbi. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal a few days ago about how, let's say, Islamic extremists were looking at coronavirus and how they just saw the virus as a plague inflicted to punish the West, so to speak. And so I don't know if everyone sees it, but the good thing is that maybe it allows people to think a bit about what's really important. And the fact that you're at home and you're with your immediate family gives you an opportunity to reconnect. With us and the Palestinians, as you know, unfortunately, peace does not seem to be around the corner. But we've been working with them very, very closely on coronavirus issues. Even the United Nations has offered praise for Israel, which does not happen every day of the week, you know, Rabbi, for the way we've been working with the Palestinians on the coronavirus issue. I mean, we have an interest in the Palestinians being on top of this and not seeing it spread. Many of our neighboring countries do not have established healthcare systems like we do in Israel and in Britain. And we're worried about what happens in some of those countries as well. I think coronavirus, to answer your question, it can be an opportunity for us to reconnect and work together with our neighbors on practical issues where we ultimately show that we're all human beings and we're all in this struggle together. And maybe, hopefully, Rabbi, when this is over, that can give us something to build on.
Right. I know that one of the BDS spokespeople said that if Israel did come up with a cure, he probably would end up taking it.
Yeah, what can you say?
Right. Are there any particular developments in Israeli technology and medicine at the moment that are noteworthy?
The truth is, yes, there's all sorts of Israeli companies and people who come out with ideas, either for immunization and or for treating with people who have the disease to lower the fatality rate. I got a whole, from one of Israel's leading hospitals, I got a whole document in English to pass on to the British government, lessons they've learned. But as to, to answer your question, it's a bit like being half pregnant. You don't actually have a immunization until you have it. It's not good being close. You actually have to have it, yes? There's not, it's the same with someone who's got the disease treating it. If you're close, it's not good enough. You've got to have it. And it's possible that Israel will find, or help find part of the solutions. We're not there yet, but it's possible. We've been on the cutting edge of so much technological development, so much medical development, that it's quite possible Israel could be one of the places where we find solutions that can benefit all humanity. But to say that Israel has already produced something like that is premature.
Right. So just leaving the virus for a moment and heading back into Israel. What's happening with choosing a government there? If you could just encapsulate the last year and a half in 30 seconds.
I'll try. Obviously, we've had 3 elections in less than 12 months, which demonstrates clearly that Israel is a democracy, but unfortunately, it's not good for political stability. One would like to be like the United Kingdom and have an election, vigorously fought, and then have a result and have a government. But it looks like it's possible that we're finally going to get a government. Netanyahu and Gantz are in very serious talks that are happening actually today because it's Kol HaMoed and one can negotiate. It's possible that there's going to be an Israeli government based on sort of national unity, which will include the Likud and blue and white. It's not a deal done yet, but I'm confident. I think there's a very good chance that there will be a unity government, and that's good for the country, I believe.
Right. So I know when we met a couple of weeks ago at an event you hosted, you said that it was impossible to replace you as ambassador in the absence of a properly installed prime minister at the moment. And we'll talk about your plans for the future in a moment. But what can happen and what can't happen in Israel under the current regime?
So it's a government that is a caretaker government. In other words, after an election, but before a new government is formed, there are legal limitations on what a government can do. It's a bit like Purdue in this country. And so one of the things you can't do is you're limited on senior civil service appointments. You can appoint temporary people, but you can't appoint permanent people because that is the prerogative of a newly elected government. I think the logic is that they didn't want outgoing governments to start putting all their people into positions after losing an election. Yes, and there's sense to that. And obviously, being ambassador in the United Kingdom is a senior civil service position.
Right, and other things in Israel that can and can't happen as a result.
There are limits to what you can do with budgets. You can't, that is a major impediment on a caretaker government. Only the new incoming government can do budget planning. Planning you can do, but to pass a budget and make it into law. So there are limitations. On the national security side, caretaker government has all the powers of a regular government. In other words, if tomorrow there was a barrage of rockets from Gaza and we needed to respond or something like that, the government has the authority it needs.
Right. We hope that won't happen.
Of course.
The President Rivlin spoke 4 or 5 years ago about the 4 tribes in Israel, for the secular, the national religious, the ultra-Orthodox, and the Arabs, as 4 roughly equal significant sectors within the community, and each of them with their own needs and fears of the other. Do you see Israeli society as something that's becoming more polarized? What efforts are being made to try and bring people together? I
think that Israeli society, they're always, to use the president's term, they were the tribes of Israel. And the people lived in their different tribes. But I think now more than ever, the different tribes have legitimacy. If there was in the past maybe a sort of a cultural hegemony that to be an Israeli, you had to be, I don't know, the kibbutznik, paratrooper, farmer, yes? That was the Israeli, yes? Today, I think there is understanding and an acceptance that there's not one way to be Israeli, there are different ways to be Israeli. And specifically with Arab Israelis and with ultra-Orthodox groups that have not been in the mainstream, there's an understanding that they are accepted as part of the society, and how can they be integrated in the society in a more successful way, ways where they can keep their own traditions, their own culture, their own education systems, but to integrate them better into the economy and into society. They are the challenges that we face. And a lot of this, it depends if you want to look at a half glass that's full or a half glass that's empty, because you can point to the problems. But are there more Haredim going into the army than ever before? There definitely are. Are there more Arab women going to university than ever before? There definitely are. In other words, you can look to factors which actually see that the Israeli story is a story of success. When I used to work with the Prime Minister, there's a tradition in Israel that when schools open, at the beginning of September, that the Prime Minister always goes to a school or 2 or 3 and goes to meet the children on the first day of the school year. And I remember one year, the Prime Minister went to an Arab school in Ramla. And I remember speaking to the students and asking the pupils there what they want to be. And one of them said she wants to be a doctor. And he said, you be a doctor. And one said she wants to learn Chinese. And he said, great, that's so important that you learn Chinese because that's the future. We want to have good relations with China. That's good for our economy. And the idea that all Israelis should be able to pursue their aspirations. That's good for them as individuals, and it's good for the country. We don't want to have a situation where it's just the Tel Aviv, Herzliya area is prosperous, yes, and people who live in the regional periphery or in the periphery of the cities are left behind. That's not good for Israel. We want to have a situation where everyone has the opportunity to move ahead and be part of the Israeli success story. And ultimately, Rabbi, I believe this very strongly, yes? By any objective criteria, Israel is an amazing success story. If you look at where Israel was 72 years ago and where we are today, it really is an unprecedented success story from the point of view of our democracy, from the point of view of our economy, from the point of view of our educational institutions. I mean, when the British pulled out in May 1948, I mean, we had a GDP per capita of a developing economy, very similar to that of all our neighbors. Today, Israel is, yes, high-tech Israel. Anyone who's been to Israel recently knows the new prosperity. And Israel is a story of success. And what we have to do, and to answer your question, is to make sure that all elements of Israeli society can also enjoy that success.
So part of our success has always been trying to develop links with other countries. Every now and then you report on new friends and partners. Has the current crisis brought us closer to people? And aside from that and beyond that, what's going on in terms of sporting and technology links with the world beyond our immediate borders?
So the good news, and it's underreported because good news is always underreported. It's bad news that gets to the front pages, yes? But the good news is Israel today is speaking to more of our neighbors than ever before in the history of the Jewish state. We're talking to more Arab governments than ever before. I think we're talking to the majority of countries in the Arab League. And now everyone who's listening to this conversation knows that Israel has peace treaties with two important Arab countries, with Egypt and Jordan. But we have over the last few years built partnerships, built relationships with countries across the Arab world, in North Africa and especially in the Gulf. And this is a good thing. Arab governments who for years saw Israel as an enemy, today increasingly see Israel as a friend and even a partner, an ally, because the same forces that threaten them threaten Israel. And this has brought us together, whether it's the threat posed by Islamist extremism, groups like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, whether it's the threat posed by Iran. We've seen this convergence, this rapprochement between the Arabs and Israel, and that's very, very important. And it gives me also reason for confidence and optimism as we move forward, because in the past, when Israel was looking for friends, we'd have to look west, yes, to Europe and to Britain and to America. Today, Israel has partners in the region, and that is a revolutionary change, which I think will make a real impact on the way Israel is perceived and lives in the region.
So, what's it like being an ambassador?
When I got this job, one of my British colleagues said, you'll enjoy it, but you'll have to get used to he said to me, being an ambassador is a bit like being a junior royal, yes? You go to events, you smile, you make speeches, you make toasts. So that's part of the job. Obviously, I like the political part of the job the most, where the talks I have with the British government, with members of parliament, that appeals to me. The work I do with the Jewish community, I like very much, Rabbi. I'm also the ambassador to Britain's Jewish community, and I enjoy that part of the job very much as well. There's the economic stuff the ambassador does to encourage trade between our two countries. And you should know, it's not to do with me, yes? Maybe it's to do with other factors. But every year that I've been here, in the 4 years I've been here, every year we've seen a new record in Israel-UK trade. We're about $9 billion today in bilateral trade between Israel and the United Kingdom. Now, trade you can count because, you know, there are customs officials. There's at least an equal amount in investment and in services, which are more difficult to quantify. But you should know that after the United States, China and the United Kingdom compete for the second place as a market for Israeli products, for Israeli exports. That means Britain is a stronger economic partner to Israel than is Germany or France or Italy or any other European country. And we have a strong partnership, and it's good, and I'm proud to see that that is continuing.
What projects do you get to initiate as an ambassador? You know, when you get to choose priorities of what you would like to do? And what are the areas which you've said, you know, this is how I'm going to do my bit within the community?
So the truth is Britain has a very organized and strong Jewish community. And I didn't come here to recreate the wheel, yes? I didn't have to reinvent something. And there are some things that Jewish communities around the world, when they look at Britain, they said, why didn't we do it the British way? I think probably the best example is CST, yes? Which Jewish communities across the planet look at Britain and the Jewish community here and CST and say, we should have something like that. Or Jewish care, the way you look after your elderly in this country, or the people who are facing disabilities. The strong Zionist part of this community, which people who have family in Israel. So many British Jews have told me they've got family in Israel. People visit Israel. There's so much this community can be proud of. So I didn't come here with some goal that I was going to shake things up. I thought this community is working, and I'm going to work with that community. Obviously, I have opinions sometimes, and I share them with friends. But on the whole, I think British Jews can be proud of what they've built in this country.
Right. I was looking at sort of other projects, like, for example, just around a year ago, I was invited to your residence where you held an interfaith iftar dinner. I mean, people might not imagine that this would be something that the ambassador for Israel would be holding. But was this something that you started yourself? And there were religious leaders from the Islamic world in the defense forces and the diplomatic corps, as well as the mosques, that you brought around your table. That was an amazing thing to be doing.
So credit for that goes to my predecessor, Daniel Taub, who started this doing the iftar dinner at the residence of the ambassador. And I've continued that. So if we talk about someone creating something new, credit goes to my predecessor. It's very important. I'll tell you the truth, Rabbi. It's for a Muslim leader to come to the house of the Israeli ambassador to celebrate the iftar is a big step. It's easier in many ways for them to go to your house or to a Jewish community, because then, you know, that's just communal to communal. To come to the Israeli ambassador is a step, and I'm glad that you could come that evening and to see that there are Muslims in the British Muslim community who are willing to engage with Israel, who are willing to accept our hospitality. And I don't know if it was the evening when you were at my place, because I've done a number of these, but we can discuss that you know, the Jewish tradition with the relationship with Islam is very, very interesting. I mean, from a historic point of view, yes, who had it better in the Middle Ages? The Jews of Christian Europe or the Jews of the Muslim Middle East? Who had a better life? Who was accepted? Who faced tolerance? Yes, there's no doubt that it was probably better to be a Jew in the Muslim Middle East, yes, from the point of view of your ability to practice your faith in security. Now, maybe that has changed since liberalization and the French Revolution and democracy and all that, yes, but we should never forget that there were very strong roots and cultural cooperation and I mean, if you, Rabbi, obviously you know this much better than me, but the Rambam was very much affected in the culture and the society he lived in. Spanish Jewry, its impact on Jewish thought, and that was, they were very much influenced by the prevailing elements. And we should never forget that. It's not like that Jews and Muslims are condemned to fight. On the contrary, we should be very much aware of our common traditions. And if I can do a small part encouraging that in while I'm here in London, that's a good thing. I also want to say something that I think needs to be said. So much of the interfaith world can be, I don't want to say superficial, but you agree on what's easy to agree with. So we both want to keep faith schools. We both want to keep shechita. We both want to make sure that there's kosher food and they can have their halal food. Yes, there are things that there is an obvious common agenda. And that's why in many ways it's easier for someone from who represents a Muslim organization or a Muslim religious leader to visit the Jewish community. When they come to the Israeli ambassador, that's something different. Then they're saying, yes, we have to learn to live with Israel. That's a more difficult step. And I'm happy to do those iftars every year. And I'm very thankful that you could come to one and see it with your own eyes.
Honored to be invited. What can we do to help you and to help Israel as a community here?
Well, the first thing is to stay safe, yes, to please follow the directions given by the government, and that we should all get over this crisis with good health, yes. That's the most important thing. In the longer term, British Jews are very supportive of Israel, and I see that every day in different areas. And I see it at my residence because I have a feeling that it's my obligation, yes, to support charities that are doing good work in Israel. And I've seen it in this country, friends of different Israeli universities, friends of different Israeli hospitals, friends of this community, friends of that community. It's a wonderful thing to see when I see British Jews every day as part of doing things, obviously, for Britain. They also give so much of their energy and their time and their resources to support good projects in my country.
What have been the highlights of your time here?
Rabbi, should I not finished yet? Should I be doing my summary already? I don't know. Obviously, the 100 years to the Balfour Declaration, the centenary that we did, was quite a historic event, I should say. I mean, ultimately, the Prime Minister of Israel came, and there was a joint event with the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and to mark the anniversary, the centenary of the Balfour Declaration, that was quite an event. We also celebrated here 70 years to Israel's independence, and we had a whole series of events. I should tell you that we were supposed to have this year, and we had a plan and we had a budget to celebrate 70 years of Israel-UK relations, yes, the full diplomatic relations, which started in 1950 with the exchange for the first time of ambassadors. We were going to do something this year. We were even talking with the Foreign Office of doing an event together to mark that. But obviously, because of coronavirus, that has had to be, at least for the time being, put on hold.
And are there any particular episodes you've had here that you found particularly amusing or surreal as ambassador?
So one of the things I've enjoyed doing is going to universities to speak, yes? And I think it's very important that Israeli diplomats, that Israeli ambassadors go to speak to young people who are studying at universities, because ultimately the other side is very active on campus. And if I don't go, and if people like me don't go, so you could theoretically be a student at a British university and you'd never hear the other side. You'd always only hear an anti-Israel opinion. And so I've made an effort with my team at the embassy to visit as many universities as is possible. I went to one university here in London where there was a nice demonstration against me to greet me. They were very disappointed that I was speaking because they hadn't had an Israeli official there for some 12 years. So I was glad to be there, and I'm glad to go back there. And I think it's an important part of my job. I mean, ultimately, diplomacy isn't just going to the Foreign Office and to Number 10 and to speaking to members of Parliament. Diplomacy is also out there to society. And if I'm invited to a university, I will go. And if there's a university that hasn't invited an Israeli official for quite some time, I will see if it's possible that someone will invite me. I think that's an important part of my job, first and foremost, because as I said before, people should be able to hear an Israeli perspective, because as I say, the other side is very active. but also because, and I believe this strongly, in all these campuses, there are small groups of Jewish students who know that Israel is in the right, who know the essential justice of Israel's cause, but maybe aren't up to step on all the different, how to answer the difficult questions. And if I'm helping give them confidence, if I'm helping them feel stronger in their own convictions, that's also a major mitzvah.
Wonderful. I'm going to open up to a couple of questions. I've got Ashley Praga. I'm just going to unmute you, Ashley. Go on.
Hello there, Ambassador. Good morning. One quick question, if I may, is obviously Israel's approach with the coronavirus has been quite widely recognized, especially over here. Do you envisage an increase in Aliyah generally in Israel post-coronavirus?
I've seen the following, okay? And this is interesting. First of all, I saw it with the Israeli community in London, and we've all got Israeli friends here in London. I'm sure you do too, Ashley. There was
I'm in London. Excuse my background.
Sorry?
I'm in London. Just excuse my background.
No, but I'm saying we've all got Israeli friends who we saw go back to Israel for the crisis. And I'm not talking about Israelis who are on holiday, I'm talking about Israelis who live here. And they felt more confident in Israel to deal with the crisis than being outside Israel. And I know I was getting complaints from British Jews who suddenly discovered that their ability to visit Israel was limited. And I apologize to all those people who are planning to come to Israel for the holidays now and couldn't for all sorts of reasons. I mean, will this in the long term increase Aliyah? Does the fact that Israel seems to be doing the right thing with this crisis, that we're keeping our level of fatalities relatively low, could that encourage people to see a positive side of Israel that they hadn't seen before? Maybe.
Okay.
Deborah Clements. Hello.
Hello.
Deborah, you had a question? Yeah.
Hi. Yes, hello. In the UK, there have been several initiatives to support the income of workers and try to limit redundancies so that businesses can continue beyond the coronavirus issue. What financial and emotional support is the government giving the Israeli people? Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. I think very similar to here. Obviously, a lot of people are unemployed. Everyone in the tourist industry, everyone in the hospitality industry. People are being asked to work from home. And so there's the economic impact of the virus as well as the health impact. And obviously the government is spending a lot of money on social programs and to support small businesses that are going through a difficult time. I think what's going on in Israel on those issues mirrors what's going on in Britain. It's not like that you can solve everyone's problem tomorrow, but can you provide a safety net for people to survive this difficult period? We're all dealing with these challenges, obviously, together. We're having a whole discussion in Israel now about the schools. Are we going to reopen the schools sometime after Pesach? If we do we open all the schools? Do we open selectively? What about teachers? I've got a sister-in-law who's a teacher over the age of 55. Do teachers who are in a risk category, should they return to schools if schools are open? These are questions that we're debating and discussing in Israel. We don't have good answers. One of the proposals, which has not yet been finalized, is because the children are going to miss out 2-3 months of school now, they're talk in Israel of canceling the summer holidays. And I don't know how the kids will respond to this, yes? And to have school all through the summer. In the meantime, of course, there's the digital learning that's going on with Israeli school children. But we're grappling with these issues and we're trying to do our best. And as I said before, to create a safety net for those who are going to go through difficult economic problems because of this.
Andrew.
Ambassador, good morning. Good to see you again. Thank you for this hour. Just something slightly different. You've said the many people you have met, places you've been to. Is there anyone that so far has eluded you? Is there anyone either alive or even dead that you would love to have met, and why?
So there are one or two universities that have provided, have not allowed me to attend. It's never said because it's me or because of Israel. It's always like, oh, the security is too difficult, yes? Or that, or someone has to pay for the security, it shouldn't fall on it. There's an excuse, but that is a very, very minority phenomena. Most places I've been able to go to and speak at and make my case. What I've discovered also is that instead of me coming to give a speech, right? Let's say I've been invited by the Politics Society or the Middle East Society, whoever invites me to give the talk, I always say, well, why don't you find someone who's a bit critical? And instead of me getting up and making a speech, we do like an Andrew Marr type situation where they ask me all their difficult questions and I can answer them. And that way I've discovered it's possible to have a more serious discussion than just me coming and giving a speech. And then people think, oh, they're getting Israeli government propaganda. In other words, if you can make it sort of a dialogue program, and there are serious questions and people should be able to ask those. And I think it's a more positive way of creating dialogue.
David Lasser.
Good morning. Thank you, Ambassador. Some years ago, there was, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Some years ago, there was a frustration in the UK community that every ambassador that came didn't speak good English. When we finally got Daniel Tobe, a local born and bred boy, we were all very glad. And obviously we're very glad we've now got a perfectly English-speaking ambassador. Do you think this is now ingrained in the Israeli psyche that every ambassador that comes to the UK should have this ability? And is this similar in other countries, do you know, for example, in France, Germany, etc.?
So I'm allowed to correct you just a little bit. There was a previous ambassador who was born in Manchester, who actually wrote a very good book that I can recommend called The Prime Ministers. Yudav Ner, does the name mean anything?
Yes.
And of course, Ron Prosor, who I'm sure many of you remember, was Israeli born, but because he was the son of a diplomat, he spoke mother tongue English. And so there is an understanding in Israel that it's important to have someone who can communicate and who feels at home in the language, because ultimately as an ambassador, you are verbally communicating with people all day, and to have command of the language is a very important factor. It's not always possible to find, let's say, someone to be the ambassador in Tokyo who speaks good Japanese, or the ambassador in Seoul who speaks good Korean. We're not the United States. We're not a superpower. In some countries, let's say if you're appointed the American ambassador in, I don't know, in Indonesia, so actually they'll give you a year to go study Indonesian before you take up your posting, yes? We can't do that in Israel. We don't have the manpower. We don't have the budgets. But we always try to find someone who has the language ability, who can communicate with the local people the best ways as possible. Obviously, you talked about France. In France, you need to send someone who speaks good French. In Spain, you need someone who speaks good Spanish. In some of the smaller countries where you have a language which is not considered an international language, sometimes you can get by with English, but obviously it's better to speak the language and to be able to communicate effectively. Because that's what you do as ambassador. Your job is to be an emissary of your country and to communicate the messages of your country.
Alan Godfrey.
Hi there from Israel. I work for a diplomatic mission here, and on the subject of languages, I believe that all meetings held by the Foreign Office in Jerusalem are done so in English for all the incoming ambassadors. My ambassador, I know, studies Ivrit every week. She has lessons to learn the language, as do the other diplomats, actually. One thing I wanted to point out was on Layla Seder in Israel. It was very moving at 8:30 in the evening. Whether you were, whichever part of the Seder you were in, everybody was encouraged to go out onto their mirpeset, their balcony, and start to sing Manish Tana. And it was unbelievable. Where we are on a residential street, it was a bit quiet. Where there are tower blocks, high rises, the cheering, the noise was phenomenal, and a real community spirit, despite the fact that people were very much alone on Layla Seder.
I can appreciate that. Are you by any chance from Modi'in? Because I know in Modi'in they did that at 8:30.
I'm in Hod HaSharon.
Okay. Because my family's in Modi'in and they told me about that 8:30 Manish Tana thing, and it was very moving. But the truth is, let's be clear, that Israel on the holidays is especially moving. Yom Kippur in Israel is very, very special. Rosh Hashanah in Israel is very, very special.
It's very much like Yom Kippur every day at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. Well, at least you're eating. At least you're eating, sir.
Yes.
The festivals are very special in Israel. Anyone who's been to Israel on the festivals knows that. And think of it. In Britain, yeah, if you work and you have to be home, especially in winter, by 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, that's difficult for a lot of companies, yeah? Why is my employee leaving early and during Chol HaMoed and not Chol HaMoed, but during all these Jewish holidays, and you have 2 days, right? In Israel, we only have 1 day, yes? Mm-hmm. When you're not at work, I mean, in Israel, it fits, right? It's much easier to live a full Jewish life than it is in the United Kingdom in many ways.
Yeah, but you don't get much time off work to go out, for example.
They make you work hard when you're there, yes, correct.
Tony.
Sorry,
Yep.
Was that me?
Yep.
Sorry, Rabbi, not Rabbi, Ambassador, you've got another person in Israel. And I just wanted to ask you, I mean, we're feeling such a difference in the atmosphere in the community as regards coronavirus when we were in England, and as I understand it, for quite a while after that, we came on the 11th of March, versus the attitude here in Israel. Why do you think that is? I mean, the Israelis do what they're told, whereas the Brits, for a long time, seem to just take the whole thing, I hate to say it, but almost as a joke.
So I'd say the following. I mean, in Israel, there's every couple of years there's a crisis, yes? It's either missiles from Gaza or it's something else, yes? And maybe as a country, because of that, we're more used to dealing with this sort of crisis situation, yeah? They said some of the Asian countries like Singapore and South Korea, because of the SARS virus 5 years ago, that enabled them to better deal with Corona now. And so maybe the fact that Israel has had to live with different crises over our lifetime makes us a bit more, as a society, yes, that we can adjust and deal with the crisis in a way that's a bit more expeditious than other countries. Having said that, the British stip upper lip, yes, of we will, how do we say, we will continue. There's something to be said for that, yes? There's something Brits can be proud for that. That's, we're not panicking, stip upper lip, we'll continue. There's something Britain, that's something I think all Brits can be proud of.
Mr. Ambassador, you've been very, very generous with your time. What's next? And so my final question to you, what's next for you and Vered and the family?
So we'll return to Israel in the summer, finishing our posting here. Ambassadors have to remember we are ambassadors, we are emissaries, we're here for a limited time. Our job is not to go local. I can't give an exact time of when I'll be leaving because obviously it depends on who's replacing me and I have to coordinate with him or her. But we'll finish here. We'll return to our house in the Modi'in area where we live. And I'll hopefully find a job in government which I will find equally as challenging.
Well, we wish you luck with that. And let me take the opportunity to wish you and Vered a Moadim L'Simcha. And thanks to all your family and all your staff for everything that they do within the community and for the state of Israel. It's all hugely, hugely appreciated. And thank you so much for making the time to join with us this morning. Thank you.
That's my pleasure. And this year, on the assumption that I'm leaving in the summer, this is the first time, yes, since arriving here as ambassador, that I will not be at Kinloss on Erev Yom Ha'atzmaut, where together with Bnei Akiva, you do that amazing evening of prayer, where we remember the fallen soldiers on Yom HaZikaron, and then we celebrate Israel on Yom Ha'atzmaut. That has been part of my ambassadorial routine since arriving here, and I'm sorry we can't all get together physically, at least this year. But Kinloss has been, in many ways, an important part of my time here as ambassador, and I thank you and the congregation for the support that I've received and that Israel receives from your congregation as a whole, and by so many individuals who are members of your congregation who give of their time and their energy to supporting Israel and Israeli causes. And I thank you for that. Toda Rabba.
Thank you very much indeed. If I could just thank the ambassador again, and please show your appreciation by either raising your hands in applause or pressing the button on your screen. Thank you very much. Please stay safe. Do not take unnecessary risks. Take advantage of all the services that are available to help you locally and through the community. And I wish everybody who's here a Moadim L'Simcha. May you have a healthy continuation of the festival.